Ladies and gentlemen, this is Luke Johnson and Jennifer Avery, and we're back with a brand new edition. And that's the extent of my freestyle skills. We're back. We're doing something new here on Noetic, the humanities teaching platform. Jennifer suggested that we take a look at a poem, and I always have a great time analyzing poems. I find something very therapeutic about it. I think it must be like a feeling akin to like what others experience when they do like crossword puzzles or something like that.
Yeah, I feel the same way about poetry. And actually, I got pretty deep into researching Mad Song. It's been one of my favorite poems for a very long time. And I remembered some of my analysis from college, but I did some research, and I even found part of King Lear to read. It was very nice. I've forgotten how much I love to research poetry, so...
Yeah, well, we'll have to keep that trend coming.
Yeah.
So, if you could not tell, we are going to be discussing William Blake's Mad Song, and I have some commentary here, but it's going to be primarily a lesson driven by Jennifer. But you guys all know how much of an egomaniac I am, so there's a good chance I'll probably take it over at some point. So Jennifer, I just so everybody who's listening knows, on the Noetic platform, in preparation for this conversation, I went and found everything I could on William Blake, some research articles, and turned them into small audiobooks for you, so you can go check that out. They're largely biographical materials concerning him and his wife, Catherine. Couple books on his, couple articles on his Gnosticism and mysticism, and even an old school lesson. Something that I thought was really interesting, and I found this lesson from like a 1911 lesson plan that a school teacher did, and they had like fourth graders reading William Blake poems, and I just think, what a wonderful world we would live in if fourth graders were breaking down William Blake poems.
I would love for that to be our world.
Yeah.
And Blake is really not that murky, so I think he would be a good poet for fourth graders.
Well, you know what? I bet fourth graders might be able to understand the meaning of Blake a little bit better than adults. And like we'll talk about, Blake is in touch with something more mystical and primordial. And when I think about children, I think of them being innocent and closer to truth than we as adults are. I think as adults we have a tendency, our pride tends to blind us, and we fall away from things that are very obvious. So what I like about Blake is that, and you'll probably talk about this, so I should just let you talk, is the way that he looked at the world and how interesting it was. He looked at the world in a way where he was having spiritual revelations all the time, and he was ridiculed and persecuted for it, but it ended up making him one of the most wonderful poets. And I guess, thank God, he had his air quotes hallucinations or epiphanies or whatever we're going to call them. But without further ado, I'll just let Jennifer take over and start the conversation off how she wants to talk about it.
All right, so Mad Song was a poem written by William Blake. And Blake is considered, some people consider him a pre-romantic, and some people consider him a romantic. But he was born in 1757, so he is right in that Regency period. But in poetry, while Jane Austen was doing satire and writing about manners and things like that, poetry was becoming more emotional, more romantic. This is the time of people like Keats and Shelley and Byron. These are all the romantic poets are coming about in this period. But Blake is a little bit earlier than your Keats and your Shelleys, which is why some people consider him pre-romantic. But in any case, Mad Song appeared in... Well, Blake was the son of a hosier, which means that he basically made tights and underwear and things like that. But the interesting thing about Blake's family was that they were English separatists. Not that they were separate from the state, from England, the country, but they were they were dissenters of the Church of England. They were Protestants, but they didn't like the Church of England. And later on, Blake became more and more disenchanted with organized religion. Although he was a very religious person, he viewed it more as a personal relationship with God through the Bible. And he did have visions. He had lots of visions, and he was also an artist, and he was also, some people say that he was an advocate of what a lot of romantics would call natural love, which is not bound by law. So he was actually polygamous, and
really?
Yeah. Or
I thought he was deeply devoted to his wife,
He
Catherine.
was devoted to her, but he did bring in a second wife when they could not conceive.
Really?
Yeah.
I hadn't encountered that in my research.
He was an odd critter. Blake was a very odd person. He was probably the perfect example of eccentric. Because he had his own ideas of everything, and like I said, he had visions. And he felt like he was in direct contact with the divine. And he was also an artist, by the way. And you can kind of peek a little bit into his brain when you look at his art.
I love his engravings and his sketches and everything. It's phenomenal.
Oh, I do too. I love his. He did actually have many of his books of poetry were illuminated, which means that they were illustrated. But Blake went a step farther and made a plate with an illustration that also had the poem printed on it. And so, here's an example of that. If anybody ever if you want to see better pictures of these, you can look online. Just look up Blake illuminated books, or just look up an image search. And this was Infant Sorrow and Mad Song, and this is in his book Songs of Experience, which was an illuminated book. Every single page looked like this. So
cool.
Yeah, so it's very, very cool.
I didn't get that experience. If anyone's interested, if you go to LibriVox, the audiobook company, they have Songs of Innocence and Experience in the Book of Thel all together, which I listened to, and it was really wonderful. I made it through about a sixth of Jerusalem, and that's considered his epic masterpiece, and I really want to continue to work through that. I just didn't have enough time to get through all of it. Is there any particular reason that you gravitated towards this poem and this stage of his work rather than others? What made you choose this one?
I remembered reading Mad Song years ago, and I always really liked it for some reason. Just some marvelous lines in this poem. Just the way that they sound, the way the words sound, and the rhythm of it. I've always really liked that about Blake. And I actually, when I was a teacher, when I taught 10th grade, I did a lesson with Mad Song and comparing it to King Lear, the Tempest scene. And I remembered that, and I remember thinking, that would be nice to do that one again, because I haven't read it in a while, and I read it again. Like I said, I just got deep into the research, probably not as deep as I could have gone, but just enough. But in any case, I've always liked Blake, just because he's kind of. It's like we were saying before. He's almost got this kind of childlike sort of thing to him, that he was one of those people who really embraced life, who really embraced nature, and he kind of did things his own way, and I've always been an admirer of that in a person. Even though I wouldn't be a nudist or polygamous, but
he was a nudist too.
Well, that's some people have suggested it. I don't know if that's a proven thing or not, but a lot of people have said that he was a nudist.
So much speculation today. Well, Well, how about, did you have any more background information? Because I think what would be good, and I've done this already, so I don't need to do it, is I think it would be good for the audience to hear the poem.
Yeah.
I've created a module already on the Noetic platform where I read it. So I already know what the sound of my own voice is. Would you care to read the poem for our audience?
Yeah, but before I do read it, this some people consider this a satire. Just keep that in mind as I read it. It's a satire of a book called Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, which is often referred to as Percy's Reliques. And there were 6 what he called mad songs, and these are, and some people think that Blake wrote this as a satire of those mad songs, and we'll talk about that later. I
think I did come across something about that. Yeah, I think I did come across something about that.
Okay, now here's Mad Song by William Blake. The wild winds weep, and the night is a cold. Come hither, sleep, and my griefs unfold. But lo, the morning peeps over the eastern steeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn. Lo, the vault of paved heaven with sorrow fraught, my notes are driven. They strike the ear of night, make weep the eyes of day. They make mad the roaring winds, and with tempests play. Like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe, after night I do crowd, and with night will go. I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased, for light doth seize my brain with frantic pain. Right. So,
yeah, that's really amazing. You said you did it better than I did.
Thank you.
I really like it when you read poems. You're really good at it.
Thank you.
Any tips on how to read poems to anyone who might be listening?
Just don't get into the da 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 rhythm. And just go with the words, and be mindful of punctuation when you're reading poetry.
Oh man, I have so much to learn. All right, so teach me, teacher.
Okay, so Mad Song, like I said, Mad Song is one of those poems, which is another reason why I'm so very fond of it, is one of those poems where it doesn't, we will probably never know exactly what Blake had in mind. And that's something that I like to remind people of. You will never know why this person wrote this poem. And you need to understand that. But part of why this poem is so good, I think, one of the things I like about it is it can be interpreted 1,000 different ways. And it really can. But the way I see it, I look at it by quatrain. Not quatrain. These are not quatrains. These are by stanza. Quatrain, there are not 4. There's 3 here. But sorry. I'm rusty on my poetry. But in any case, the first stanza, the wild winds weep and the night is a cold. Come hither, sleep, and my griefs unfold. But lo, the morning peeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn. The way that I look at this stanza, it's almost to me like this, the speaker is disappointed when the morning comes, because he embraces his griefs in his nightmares, or while he's inspired. I see it in about 3 different ways. This whole poem. The first way is as artistic. It's almost like artistic madness, or the act of creation, which can be almost termed as a kind of madness. The second way that I see it is as the satire, making fun of this artistic madness that gets so embraced by the Gothic novelists and the Romantic poets and things like that. And the third is as is just as almost like a way to express as just raw emotion kind of sort of thing. Okay, so like I said before, I kind of see this in three ways, which you can leave that in. But I tend to lean towards actually the artistic suggestion of that it's about artistic madness or creation sort of thing, but kind of combined with the satire. But in any case, the wild winds weep and the night is a cold. All these words that he uses are very strong words. It's very closely associated with dark things, wet things, scary things, and as in the Mad songs by in the Percy's Reliques, he actually says that the Mad song as a concept, that the reader may consider them as so many trials of skill in a very peculiar subject, as the contest of so many rivals to shoot with the bow of Ulysses. So Percy almost saw these Mad songs as a test of skill. I don't think Blake thought so. I think Blake thought that these were easy. And that's where the satire comes in. And so he's using all of these really simple, short Anglo-Saxon words that conjure up images of madness and of darkness and chaos and disorder, as a way maybe to for the reader to feel what madness is like, but also to kind of see why it's mad. It's like you're going towards darkness, you're embracing this darkness when there's all this light over here. And that's where the first stanza kind of presents this whole idea of darkness and how the narrator is embracing darkness over light. Like he fears the morning. He says, and the earth, but lo, the morning peeps over the eastern steeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn. So he says the earth scorns dawn. And maybe that's the way the narrator feels about daylight. And so that's right. The first stanza.
Do you mind if I weigh in with some things? So the first point is I need some clarification because I'm afraid I may have a slight error in the translation that I grabbed. Halfway through the first stanza, mine reads, "And my griefs enfold." And I think I heard when you did your recitation, "And my griefs unfold." Is it enfold or unfold? Because that sort of shapes some of the criticism that I would make about this first stanza.
Okay, well, now in my book it says unfold, and mine is an anthology. So
I would
where's yours from?
I would trust. Mine's off just a public domain poetry site, so let's trust yours over mine.
Okay.
So let me see. Taking that into account, this line, "Come hither, sleep, and my griefs unfold. But lo, the morning peeps over the eastern steeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn." So, what do you think he's saying? That in his sleep, his griefs unfold. Now, when I first understood it as infold, I believe that to be an antiquated word, meaning that they somehow retracted and sort of nucleated, if that's even a word. They sort of got themselves together into a nucleus, and sort of the dream world took over. And then when the rustling birds of dawn woke him up, they would sort of unleash themselves again into his higher consciousness and afflict him, and that's why waking life would be so terrible for him. And I was wondering if this would give us an insight into the Blakean soul and the Blakean psychology about where grief resides, where it retracts when we sleep, what happens in our dreams, and things of that nature. But if it's "and my griefs unfold," I wonder if there's something about if there's some sort of psychological terror that's happening in his sleep, and he perhaps is wallowing in it. How do you understand what's going on here, this first stanza?
Now, the way I read unfold is my my griefs unfold. That means that they open up for him to see. They rush in upon him, and he can't get away from them. Or he begins to see them more clearly, perhaps. Now, if it were enfold, then my grief, like I'm embracing this grief. I'm enfolding it to myself. I'm embracing it. That's the way I would read it.
So do you understand sleep as a release or a relief from his griefs?
I see the sleep as embracing them. As he's asleep and he has these nightmares, but he embraces the nightmares. He likes the nightmares, which is why he seems like he feels like the earth is scorning the morning. That's the way I read it.
Well, that's a very interesting thing, because no normal person would embrace nightmares, right? And that's maybe this is part of the madness.
Exactly.
And then we have to, and I think that raises some questions about who our subject may be. We're assuming that our subject is Blake. Is it possible that our subject could be something else? Like, any normal human being doesn't want to go to sleep and experience nightmares. But could there be other entities in the Blakean cosmology that might like that nightmare realm? I mean, could this poem be written from the perspective of, I don't know, a ghost or something?
Well, it could be, and I think that there have actually been some interpretations that say it is a ghost speaking, and I can see that. But again, and this is another reason why this poem gets talked about, because it can be interpreted 1,000 different ways. But the way I see it is that I think it's the artist. Again, I think that's the entity that's speaking. But it's also or it's a mad person. Or it could be both. It's a mad artist. But,
well, we'll see. Maybe the other.
He's drawing.
Maybe the other.
The comparison between the two. Even he could be. But anyway, I forgot your question.
Well, maybe we can, once we go through the other two stanzas, and then we can reflect on the totality of the poem, we can come to some sort of conclusion about that, if at all. Then it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not like poetry is a math problem. It's not like you get it right or wrong. I mean, this is all supposed to be thought-provoking stuff that...
This is critical thinking.
Yeah, it's supposed to... Right.
All right.
But so I learned a lot about it. The only other thing I would point out from the first stanza is the personification that's going on in the first stanza, such as like... Blake is very apt to see the world as sort of filled with the divine. I think you sort of mentioned this earlier in your own way. And he seems to attribute personages to things like the wild winds and things of this nature, like as they are anthropomorphized in some degree. And I just thought that was something to point out, and maybe hints at this. You mentioned that like Blake was a very religious person and that he read the Bible a lot, and yes, he did. But he's also not your Orthodox Christian. He uses the language of the Bible to sort of enter into a mystical state where he feels like he's communing with nature. And I think we would sort of say that it's almost like his Christianity. And I'm no Blake expert. This is just me doing a little bit of research for this poem and critically thinking about this one. It's almost like Christianity is a vehicle for him to enter into some sort of Gnostic, mystic pantheism on some occasions. But I don't know the totality of his work and wouldn't offer that as a judgment for everything, but I can start to see that here in Mad Song.
Yeah. Dude was straddling worlds. That's kind of the way I've always looked at Blake. He was straddling worlds. And which is another reason I like him so much and why he was a good poet. And knowing that about Blake, then you're right. It's but anyway,
I can't wait to talk about the second stanza.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Now the second stanza. Low to the vault of paved heaven with sorrow fraught, my notes are driven. And I love these 4 lines. They're so awesome. They strike the ear of night, make weep the eyes of day. They make mad the roaring winds, and with tempests play. And this one, so, now this is where King Lear comes in. And it has been suggested a time or two by, not many people have seen this, but some people think that this might have been that this reference to Tempest is a reference to King Lear, for those of you who don't know what King Lear is, it's for Shakespeare, Lear is a king, and during Act 3. He goes mad. He's already started to go mad because his daughters are at war with each other and trying to mess with him. And so he goes off into this tempest and just raves against the tempest and just screams and yells and talks about how he's been betrayed. And when I read Mad Song, I always think of that scene of King Lear. Where he's just yelling against the wind and everything like that. But the way that I see it, this stanza, I like this stanza because when he refers to my notes, he says, my notes are driven. I think that he's referring to art or like music as in a form of expression. My music, my art, whatever it is that I do. They strike the ear of night, make weep the eyes of day. The way I see this stanza is I use all of this madness I embrace in my dreams in the first stanza to create something that affects the very foundation of the world. I do this. I use this art, I use this thing to alter the world. That's the way I see that stanza. And if you're talking satire, we're talking egoism. And that's kind of how I see that stanza. It's just with sorrow fraught, oh, low to the vault of paven heaven with sorrow fraught. I came to this enlightenment, fraught with sorrow, and when I entered into heaven, and I used all of this pain to my good, and that's how I see that second stanza. So.
Excellent analysis. So there were 2 things that struck me here. I think we have a little further evidence of a possible sort of the interaction of the subject and the environs. It seems like this sort of teeming alive world that he is in is actually able to perceive and be affected by his bard-like proclamations, which I think is kind of interesting for the world that he lives in. But then, Jennifer, I'm gonna do a little gotcha on you here. I know you weren't prepared for this. That's okay. I tried to give you a heads up. Let's look at those first 2 lines. Low to the vault of paved heaven.
Paved.
Yes. What the heck is he talking about, a paved heaven? So, what's interesting here is that we see that Blake has an older understanding of cosmology, this whole vault of heaven idea, which in Genesis 1:6 we would call this a firmament. And if you're not familiar with this, from the Vulgate, firmamentum, which is used as a translation of the Hebrew rakia. The word means simply expansion. It denotes the space or expanse like an arch appearing immediately above us. They who rendered rakia by firmamentum regarded it as a solid body. The language of Scripture is not scientific but popular, and hence we read of the sun rising and setting, also hear the use of this particular word. I could go on and on. You can find this on the BibleStudyTools.com. But I love any reference to the firmament. So
you would.
I thought I would. I would love that.
You would.
Yep, I would. Me and Blake would be two peas in a pod.
I actually think that you would. You and Blake would be bros, man. You would love each other. I know y'all would. But, all right, well, on to the third stanza. He says, and I love, again, he puts these 8 lines together, my 8 favorite lines all together. Like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe, after night I do crowd, and with night will go. So I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased, for light doth seize my brain with frantic pain. And yes, I bet Blake was a night owl. But in any case, the way that I see stanza 3 is I like darkness. I like this negativity. I like night, and I know why I fear the day. It's almost like, again, speaking as from creative madness, like maybe my creativity peaks at night, which a lot of creative people will tell you that it does. He says that he embraces, he says, like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe, after night I do crowd, and with night I will go. So he's only going to be active at night. He's going to be active in darkness. I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased. I'm going to ignore all of this good stuff, and because light hurts me. And that's basically what he's saying here. And when you're thinking about, when you look at it from the point of view of the satire, it's basically like he's saying, I punish myself. I'm punishing myself foolishly. I'm calling this. He seems to think that comfort is anti-creative. Is what is like these mad songs seem to suggest, or like Percy was trying to suggest, even that comfort is anti-creative. Well, that's stupid. I can only write when I'm comfortable, kind of thing. If you look at it from the point of view of the satire, but my feeling is basically that my creativity peaks at night. And I don't like, I embrace this darkness, and that's what gives me my edge. And I try to, and I can't do it during the day because the daylight hurts me. So,
yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting when we take our different perspectives on this poem and we step back on it and try to come up with a synthetic view, because I think the third stanza was the one that was the most perplexing to me.
It is.
But yeah, and the reason why I was perplexed by the third stanza, and this is probably because I'm looking at the trees and not the forest, is this line. I got hung up on this line, like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're right. There is probably some sort of kinship with Blake, me and him, because to me that triggers biblical imagery.
Yes.
And there are 2 specific things that make me that triggers. And the first, when I'm not really decided on who I think the subject of this poem is, the first thing that it reminded me of is when Job encountered God in the whirlwind in Job 38. And it says, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? And I would wonder if this were if this were a demonic or anti-Christian or a ghoul or ghost entity, you would see the fiend in the cloud or God in the whirlwind. You would see them as your nemesis. Mm-hmm. So I wondered if that was a reference to Job and how God oftentimes drapes himself in a cloud in the Old Testament. There's also in the Exodus story where the Jews are led out of Egypt. They're following a cloud that also took residence in the Ark of the Covenant and a bunch of other stuff. But so I'm tempted to think of God associated with clouds at some points in the Bible. But there's also, if it's not a reference to God, it also could be, in the Bible, it's also the case that Satan is referred to as the prince of the air, and a cloud is in the air, obviously. Most notably, this is said in Ephesians 2:2, where in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. So there is some of this idea that that Satan's realm is the air. Hence why frequently Satan is associated with the lightning bolt. And why so many pop culture figures brand themselves with the lightning bolt. That's actually a secret sort of acknowledgement of Satan. I won't name any names, but I think you can think of some pop culture icons that had a lightning bolt emblazoned on them.
I'm not sure I'm buying that one, but
I'm not saying it's the case, but I'm just saying the lightning bolt in some circles is a representative for.
The lightning bolt is also a representative of Zeus.
All right. Well, then we're getting into a question of one entity having many names. Right. There's also a passage in Luke where Jesus says he beholds Satan fall from heaven like a lightning bolt. That's also where that comes from. So,
but you're probably you're probably right. Blake is probably referring to that, and I'm glad that you noticed it because I'm not a biblical scholar, so I didn't. But in any case, but that would play in. That would definitely be very Blakean. Is to use this image of God speaking through negativity, God speaking through darkness, in order to achieve this enlightenment, as it were, or that could be a creative madness. So that would definitely work in my interpretation of it. So
maybe I'm still forming my interpretation of it. I thought also what was interesting about this was this term crowd in these third and fourth lines. After night I do crowd, and with night will go. I don't usually use the word crowd as a verb. I typically think of it as a noun, like a crowd, but you can crowd someone. You can. What do you make of his word choice there? It's kind of
I had to think about that one for a moment too. After night, I do crowd, and again, you got to remember that Blake is writing in the late 1700s, so mid to late 1700s, and into the 1800s, but crowd. The way I saw this is after night, I do crowd. So think about a kid, a nervous kid following their mother. The kid is nervous about his surroundings or something, or he has to go to the doctor or something, or he's afraid of something in the room they're leaving, and will get right up next to their mother and follow just half a step behind. That's what I think he means by crowd, because you can use that. You can use the word crowd in that connotation. It's like after night, I do crowd. So I'm following night as closely as I can to get out of here before day breaks. So,
right, I think that's a good analysis. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out here, the rest of the stanzas, is I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased. For light doth seize my brain with frantic pain. And what's interesting in my going through Jerusalem and some of the background research I've done, I get the sense that Blake at times associates. I'm not sure, but I get the sense that sometimes Blake associates God with the sun, and the fact that this subject is going into the night, and he's going away from where the comforts are, and when he is exposed to the light, it seizes his brain and causes frantic pain. I wonder if we're to understand that this subject is trying to get away from God as much as possible.
Yeah, you could probably read it that way, but and I'm not familiar with Blake using the sun. Of course, many people use the sun as a metaphor for God, and many don't. But yeah, and again, if he's talking about turning away from God, then that would be again would play into the satire theory. It's like if you're going to embrace this madness, then you're going away from God. So yeah, I could definitely agree with that.
Do you mind if I read the poem once more and then just step back and
it's good to reread it.
Yeah, now that we've both kind of thrown out, because we didn't consult with one another beforehand, we're learning about this as you all are. So let's read it one more time and see if we can come to some sort of consensus about what's going on here. The wild winds weep, and the night is a cold. Come hither, sleep, and my griefs unfold. But lo, the morning peeps over the eastern steeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn. Lo, to the vault of paved heaven, with sorrow fraught my notes are driven. They strike the ear of night, make weep the eyes of day. They make mad the roaring winds, and with tempests play. Like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe, after night I do crowd, and with night will go. I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased, for light doth seize my brain with frantic pain.
Yep.
All right. So who is our subject?
Again, I still think that it's like a mad artist, or a mad writer, or what have you, or just somebody who's just super creative. That's the way I tend to see this.
Could we synthesize this and say that Blake might be trying to say that something about the mad artist is ungodly or demonically possessed in some way?
I don't know that he would be suggesting that. Now, if we were talking about a satire, if that's your interpretation of the poem, a satire of these Percy's relics, then I think that would be a possibility. If that you're using this dark thing, this madness, and you're embracing it, thinking that you're increasing your creativity, or you're bringing these glorious things to the world, but really what you're doing is turning away from the light, from the good, from God.
Right.
If this is satire, I think that could be a good interpretation. If you were writing a paper on it and I was grading it, I would say, hey, that's a great idea. So.
Well, I just drew that out of thin air. Just thoughts just come to me like that.
Me too. Sometimes.
Actually, it's half your idea. So I have to give credit where it's due. Well, I mean, I think that interpretation kind of makes sense to me. Obviously, there's a wide range of latitude here. I mean, I feel kind of comfortable about what we've covered here. Is there anything else you'd like to say about it?
I don't think so. It's like I said, I like, I said, it's just, I'm a word person. I'm a structure. I'm very, my admiration is often rooted in whether they're a good writer. And the way, I just love he uses this very simple language, but he uses it to present a powerful picture. And that's another reason why, we were talking fourth graders should be covering Blake. But maybe Poison Tree, that's a perfect one for fourth graders. you don't have to be flowery to be a good poet. And
No.
And that's a big deal, I think, and that's something that Blake illustrates very well. And also that one of the great joys of poetry is that, like I said before, you cannot know what made the poet write this poem unless they wrote a paper about it and published it, or somebody found a diary or what have you. There's no way of knowing. And part of the fun is, like you were saying before, it's like figuring out a puzzle. And that's something that a lot of people seem to forget about poetry. And it's one of the things I think that scares people about poetry is they feel like they have to get the right answer when there's no right answer. The point is that you read it and you think about it. That's the point.
Yeah, and what's great about it is how, and after you do that, being able to share your insights with one another. I mean, think about how you and I learned from one another today.
And this is the kind of thing that we need. This is why we need to be covering more poetry.
Right.
And
it is sort of the way I look at poems is that they are an occasion to give glimpses into the person who composed the poem and for the individuals that are analyzing the poem. And I think when you do that, you can see the human behind the composition and the human behind. I think it elevates the dignity of all the parties involved. And in a sense, when we engage in these artistic acts, we come to have an elevated spiritual feeling for one another. Like when we were doing, not to get too romantic about it, but like when you and I were breaking it down, I feel like you, me, and Blake are in some sort of artistic communion with one another. And that's
absolutely. Yeah, when I read poetry, I want to write poetry. And it really wakes your brain up. Wakes your brain up to new ideas and new thoughts, and that's what we need. That's what you need for your entire life, is to make sure your brain stays awake, and poetry does that beautifully. So.
Fantastic. Well, I had a really wonderful time today, Jennifer. I hope you did too. I hope we can do this again soon, and you're always welcome to do these poetical analyses with me. So if you want to pick another and come back when you're ready, we'll do it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I will edit this and have it up on the Noetic app and the website soon. You can beta test noetic.online if you would like to be part of that burgeoning community. And we're going to try to go public very soon. It's been a long haul, but I'm very excited about it. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. All right. Take care.